I don't know how to start this video, so I'm just gonna get right to the point. Superhero comics are really fucking good right now. Of course, there are a lot of really good indie comics out right now as well. You know, I'm also reading some manga, but I feel like the latter two don't need all that much spotlight. People are generally more favorable towards indie comics, and manga is like weirdly fetishized in my opinion. But mainstream American superhero comics get a bad rap. Some of it, I think, is for good reason. I think Marvel and DC from the early 2010s up through the early 2020s were rough. There was definitely some good stuff that came out in that era, but it was like sifting for gold in a river of bloody diarrhea. That said, I think comics now are in a way better place than they were 2 to 3 years ago. And I just want to tell you guys what I'm reading, so hopefully these books can get more recognition. First off is World's Finest by Mark Waid and Dan Mora. This is the best superhero comic being published right now. Everything that anybody who likes superheroes likes about superheroes is on full display with this comic. And keeping it a buck, aside from his 90s run on The Flash and what I've read of his run on Daredevil, generally, I'm not a big Mark Waid guy. I feel like he built his entire career off the mindset of, weren't comics great in the 70s? Didn't everything go downhill after the 70s? Which is funny, because this book takes place squarely in 1970s era DC Comics. But he still manages to tell fresh and interesting stories, which isn't that difficult for that era, because for the longest time, DC's continuity was looser than Death Row Prison Pussy, so retroactively adding stuff to older material just isn't that big a deal. Also, Dan Mora has got to be my personal favorite DC Comics artist. I especially love how he manages to update a lot of classic character designs, but still retain the iconography of how we traditionally see those characters historically. It's just a really good book, and again, it's my personal favorite superhero comic out right now, and if you like superheroes, you should definitely give this a shot if you aren't reading it. Action Comics by Philip Kennedy Johnson and Daniel Sampieri. This is probably the best the Action Comics title has been since Grant Morrison and Rags Morales' run from like a decade ago. My favorite thing about this run so far is that Philip Kennedy Johnson and Daniel Sampieri are among the few people in recent years who remember that Superman is a pulp sci-fi character. This book is very pulpy. It's very lore heavy, but not in the sense that you have to know everything about Superman's comics history and all that. It's lore heavy in the same way that something like Bloodborne or Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is very lore heavy, which they themselves are also heavily inspired by early 1900s pulp action comics and novels. I also think Warworld Saga was, without a doubt, the most epic Superman story to come out the past God knows how long, and that's how the book opens, and so far that energy has been maintained. So definitely give this book a shot if you're a Superman fan, or if you're not a Superman fan, if you just like really cool sci-fi action adventure stories. I can guarantee that you won't regret it. Venom by Al Ewing, Ram V, and Brian Hitch. This is hands down one of my favorite comics coming out of Marvel right now. Never thought I'd say that about a Venom comic. Solo Venom comics are notoriously, historically dog shit. But ever since the Flash Thompson Space Knight era reinvented the character and the premise, I think Venom's been on track as being one of Marvel's most interesting staples. And this current book is a bizarre time travel type adventure where Eddie Brock is now the King in Black, and he's basically the god of all symbiotes, and he can experience himself subjectively through time and space through other symbiotes and coexist with other time-displaced versions of himself. And he's got this whole weird thing going on with Kang the Conqueror. This comic is just straight up better than it has any right to be, and I'm liking it a lot so far. Next up is Daredevil by Saladin Ahmed and Aaron Kuder. So Chip Zdarsky's run just ended, and given how that book ended, I wasn't sure where anyone was honestly supposed to go with the character of Matt Murdock. I feel like this is a character you can just put to bed and be done with at this point. But the first issue of this run was really strong. First of all, I'm a big Aaron Kuder fan, so if I see that he's on a book, that is an automatic purchase for me. But the story was really good too. Matt is the head priest of an orphanage, halfway house kind of situation, and he's basically forgotten that he was ever Daredevil. And the first issue has him fighting Elektra after she's been possessed by a demon, and look, I don't know, man, this shit was just cool. Daredevil has a history of being really cool and pretty consistently good, though, so I feel like recommending this is a bit of a cheat, but it's what I'm reading, and I'm really enjoying it. Shazam by, once again, Mark Waid and Dan Mora. This book is also pure superhero fun. Basically, Billy Batson, when he turns into Captain Marvel, or I guess he's just the captain now, which is stupid, but when he turns into Captain Marvel, he winds up losing his temper and freaking out at people, and sometimes nearly killing bad guys, and you find out that the gods that Billy derives his powers from are starting to control his actions, so that he himself becomes more like a god, or at least in the wrathful ancient Greek sense of the term being a god. This is another one that's been a lot of fun lately. I'm not a big Shazam guy usually, but this has definitely been a good read as of late. Miracle Man: The Silver Age by Mark Buckingham and Neil Gaiman. This is the continuation of the Miracle Man: The Golden Age series, also by Neil Gaiman and Mark Buckingham, which itself was the sequel to Alan Moore and Alan Davis's Miracle Man relaunch of the early 1980s. And picking up from the end of that initial run was the Golden Age, and that was all about exploring the world after the events of the Alan Moore series, and how different the world would be after a Superman-type character shows up in the real world and just uproots the status quo for humanity. It's a very wordy book. You know, it's not a traditional action blockbuster type superhero comic. It's more about the idea of becoming something beyond human and what the world looks like when everyone is given that opportunity. It's a really good comic. You know, it's really fun. It's also really funny. I don't normally associate Neil Gaiman as being the funny guy, but there's a lot of great moments of humor in this that caught me off guard, and it's written wonderfully, it's drawn beautifully. I highly recommend it. Immortal Thor by Al Ewing and Martin Coccolo. Now, I don't have a lot to say on this book. I haven't actively read Thor since, I think, the beginning of Donny Cates' run, but I'm quickly becoming an Al Ewing fan, and his run on the Immortal Hulk is largely considered a modern classic by a lot of comic readers. So I checked this out because of Al Ewing's growing prestige, and just because I like Thor, and this was honestly a lot of fun. The first thing to note for me here, though, was the art. I am not familiar with Martin Coccolo, but he's definitely a hot one right now, just going off this first issue. His art reminds me a lot of a mix between the more modern Olivier Coipel, who, for all intents and purposes, visually defined modern Thor, and the more retro classic Jack Kirby kind of style. I think Martin Coccolo is definitely the best of those both worlds. And I really like Al Ewing's characterization of All-Father Thor. He's very even-tempered, he's very wise, but he's still Thor, and I think that's an interesting balance that Al Ewing is striking. And the big hook for this book so far is that Thor is confronted by the ancient Celtic god of thunder, Toranos. So I'm really interested to see where that turns out in the next couple of issues. Next we have Batman Gargoyle by Rafael Grampa, and this is an out-of-continuity book. You know, it's one of those prestige DC Black Label titles, and the first issue definitely lives up to that. It's raw, it's gritty, it's violent, people say naughty words and they're not censored, and this is just another really good book. Rafael Grampa is a really dynamic artist. I've always loved looking at his variant covers. The first bit of sequential work I think I really saw him do was Dark Knight the Golden Child, which I like more than most people, honestly. But this is significantly less high concept. This is more in line with what Matt Reeves is doing with the Batman right now on film. It's a very early years Batman story that's a murder mystery, and Batman's also trying to catch a supervillain who kills people themed after a Looney Tunes inspired cartoon. I had a lot of fun reading this, and because I'm one of those weirdos who listens to music while reading comics, I had the Michael Giacchino score for the Batman playing in the background, and it honestly fit together like Danny Masterson in a pair of handcuffs. It was really good. Now, there are other books that I'm reading and enjoying right now too, but this video is going on a little longer than I anticipated. But I'm also reading Moon Knight. That's been really good ever since Jed McKay took over that book a while back. The first issue of Spine Tingling Spider-Man was really dope. In my live streams, I often talk about how Spider-Man goes really well with horror, and this book is definitely proving that so far. Also, it's just nice to have a Spider-Man book on the shelves right now that doesn't suck ass or drag its balls through the broken glass shards of mediocrity. The Green Arrow miniseries has been a lot of fun lately too. That's one title that I'm hoping gets turned into an ongoing, if enough people support it. I'm also liking the main Superman book. That's been really good lately. Superman Lost by Christopher Priest and Carlo Pagulayan has been really good lately. I know a lot of people think that it's a little slow, but much like everything else that he's done, Priest is one of those slow burn kind of writers where everything comes together in the end. Superboy Man of Tomorrow's been a lot of fun. Doom Patrol is good. I'm really enjoying Chip Zdarsky's Batman, and I've made no secret about that these past couple of months. I'm getting caught up on Doctor Strange, and that's also by Jed McKay, and Phil Noto was just killing it on the art there. Hulk was recently relaunched by Philip Kennedy Johnson and Nick Klein, and that's been amazing. They're taking Hulk back to his horror roots, and it's all about this little girl named Charlie who's like a reverse Rick Jones who wants to be the Hulk's sidekick. It's really good. You know, the first 3 issues were the introductory arc to the run, and I thought they were really strong. I really enjoyed the first issue of Tom King and Daniel Simpieri's Wonder Woman. Tom King has become a very hit or miss writer for me. The really frustrating thing I have with his work is that I think he has a lot of really good ideas, but the execution is 50-50. Sometimes you'll get Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and sometimes you won't. But here's hoping that he sticks the landing on this one. As for books that aren't out yet, but are coming out in the next couple of weeks that I'm excited for, Cy Spurrier and Mike Deodato Jr. are going to relaunch The Flash, and that's been promised to be a cosmic horror type book, so I'm excited to see that. Gods by Jonathan Hickman is coming out soon. I don't know what to make of that just yet, but I don't know. I like Jonathan Hickman, so I'll check it out. And speaking of Jonathan Hickman, he is relaunching the Ultimate Spider-Man title with Marco Checchetto, and I don't even know how to put words to how excited I am for that. Then there's Justice League versus Kong versus Godzilla, and I honestly feel like that sells itself, really. And just for shits and giggles, here are the indie books that I'm reading. Big Game by Mark Miller and Pepe Larraz. This is like the big, epic culmination of everything that Mark Miller's ever written. So Kick-Ass, Huck, MPH, Nightclub, The Ambassadors, Wanted, Nemesis. All of it takes place in the same universe, apparently. And so far, it's been working out better than expected. The Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Chaos had a really strong first 2 issues. Sean Gordon Murphy is coming out with a new Zorro comic. That's exciting. And it's not out yet, but Daniel Warren Johnson is coming out with a Transformers title, and I just can't imagine myself not shredding and liquefying the paper of that first issue and injecting it directly into my veins. But yeah, man, comics are in a really good place right now. There's a lot of really good books on the shelves, and there's a lot of really good books that are coming out on the horizon. And look, I know being overwhelmingly negative feeds the algorithm. I'm also not saying that there aren't significant problems with the comics industry that are worth talking about right now. I'm not saying that in the slightest. But as far as the comics themselves are concerned, I don't know, man. I think comics are in a really good place right now. So, that's it. That's the video. If you have any comics to recommend, let me know down below in the comment section. I'm happy to add anything to my list that you think is cool. And yeah, until next time, take care, guys.